In Christianity, we always talk about making disciples, but have you ever wondered what it actually means to make a disciple? I mean, have you ever actually made a disciple? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Today is going to be a very interesting video because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Great Commission in Matthew 28. And I have some articles that we're going to look at. And ultimately, we're going to be asking the question and answering the question, how do you make disciples? Because believe it or not, making disciples is probably one of the biggest aspects of Christianity. And just so we're clear, a disciple is somebody who follows Jesus, or they follow the teachings of Jesus, aka Christians or Christianity, or you are a Christian. So that's what a disciple means. A disciple means somebody who follows Jesus. It's somebody who's a Christian. And so when we talk about making disciples, what we're talking about is teaching other people how to be a Christian. And it's kind of strange when you really think about it, but you can't actually make disciples. You cannot make disciples if you yourself are not a disciple. In other words, if you're not following Jesus, you can't go around trying to get other people to follow Jesus. So that's really important to understand about this concept of making disciples. And the reason why we make disciples is because it's what the Bible tells us to do. When we go and we look at Matthew chapter 28, we have the Great Commission, which is where Jesus commissions his apostles, and he says, look, guys, I want you to go and preach the gospel and make disciples. And so that's what they did. And then they taught other people to do the same thing. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still teaching people how to be disciples. And so that's what we're really going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about this process of making disciples. And quite frankly, it's a heck of a lot easier to make disciples than what you think. Primarily because when you're in church and you're in Christianity and you're in the stuff, and you have all these pastors talking about discipleship and all that stuff, they make it very confusing. And it's unnecessarily confusing for whatever reason. They just like to make stuff really, really confusing. And quite frankly, making disciples and being a disciple is really easy. All it is following Jesus and teaching other people how to follow Jesus. And the simple question is, and the simple answer, of course, is, how do you follow Jesus? Well, the answer is very simple. Start reading the Bible, and you'll find your answer. But before we get too far into this video, I just want to take a couple of seconds to tell you about my YouTube channel and why I think you should subscribe. First of all, this is a Bible study channel, and what we do here is study the Bible because we take the Bible seriously, and we seriously study the Bible. So if you are looking for an online Bible study that's absolutely free, you just found it, and you can go ahead and click subscribe and the bell notification. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, my name is Adam Jordan Clark, and I publish a brand new video every single day. So today we are going to be talking about disciples, and the first thing I want to do is go and look at Matthew chapter 28. So let's take a look at this passage. We're going to keep it simple today, and we're going to use Bible Gateway simply because it's easy to use right now, and it's something that most people use anyway, so I'm sure you're already familiar with it. When you scroll down to the last part of the chapter, on chapter 28, from verses 16 down to verse 20. So these final verses here. What we see is the Great Commission. And the Great Commission is basically this idea where Jesus starts speaking right here. And he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So therefore, go and make disciples of all nations and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And surely I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. And that's how the Gospel of Matthew ends. And so when we read these words, I think it's very important to notice some of the highlighting words here, actually. One big word is disciples of all nations. So it's not only just disciples, but it's disciples of the entire world. All nations implies all world. We're also supposed to baptize them. This is talking about water baptism. And it's also, another aspect is to teach them. And so the very, very simple answer here that we get from Scripture is incredibly simple. How do you make disciples? The answer to that question is extremely simple. We just read it. Number one, baptize people. Number two, you got to teach them. Okay. And so what do you teach them? Well, you teach them theology and doctrine and, basic stuff, how to follow Jesus, which is, stuff like do unto others as you would have them do to you, go the extra mile. If somebody does this and you do that, turn the other cheek, blah, 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 these types of things. Some of the most important teachings of all of Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, and yet the church is pretty much silent on these. I don't know if you go to church regularly, but I have a question for you. When's the last time you went to church and you heard your pastor preach a sermon or teach you or teach the congregation or teach the church how to turn the other cheek or how to love your neighbor as yourself or how to go the extra mile or how to do unto others as you would have them do to you? These basic teachings that are all throughout the Gospel of Matthew, by the way. These basic teachings seem to be completely silent. It's almost as if nobody knows them. And so this is why I mentioned the point earlier where I said, hey, look, you can't make disciples of other people unless you yourself are, in fact, a disciple. So, you have to be a disciple in order to make disciples, which obviously begs the question. It's kind of the point that I'm getting at here. If nobody's actually talking about the basic teachings of Jesus, the obvious ones that would determine whether or not you're following Jesus, then we have to call into question the actual salvation of the people who are apparently preaching the gospel. And I know that that's a very harsh point for a lot of people, but I'll explain to you why. We're talking about disciples here, and it's because Jesus has all authority that's given to him on heaven and earth. And so therefore, you're supposed to go and make disciples of all nations and baptize them. And you're supposed to teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And so if we're going to accept that these are the words of Jesus, and when you actually read it in the real Bible, these are red letters. So if we're going to accept that these words are Jesus, we also have to accept that the commandment here to teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. Well, if you're making disciples and you don't know what Jesus has commanded, if you don't know what Jesus has taught, then you've got yourself a really, 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 really big problem. And it probably means, in my opinion, that you're not actually a Christian. And so that kind of sends, shivering chills down your spine, if you will, especially if you're a pastor. Because I'm not, idiotically or unconsciously talking about this matter. I understand very much what I'm saying here, and I understand very much what I'm implying here. And I think that this is a very serious issue, and I think that these implications need to be made in a very serious way, and they are being made in a very serious way. You cannot make disciples unless you yourself are a disciple. In other words, you have to be a disciple first before you can disciple somebody else. Well, if there's no evidence, if there's no fruit in your ministry of you discipling people, then it calls into question whether or not you are actually following Jesus. It's very simple logic, because we see the same exact thing in the Great Commission. Jesus doesn't tell random people to go and preach the gospel and make disciples. He tells his followers, his dedicated followers, the 11 apostles. He stands in front of them and says, look, guys, I'm going away, but I'll be back. But in the meantime, I want you to preach the gospel and make disciples, and this is how I want you to do it. Okay, so he told his disciples, the principle is very simple. If you are not a disciple, you cannot make disciples of yourself. You have to disciple yourself first, and then go out and disciple other people. So let's go ahead and look at some other articles really quickly. Here's an article from the Gospel Coalition, and it's called 4 Ways to Make Disciples. And this is by Mark Denver. And when we scroll down to the bottom here, we can actually read about who he is. He's got a PhD from Cambridge, and he's a pastor, and he has some cool stuff going on. He's got a book here if you want to buy and read. So the point is that he's got, I don't know what his PhD is actually in, but I would probably suspect here that he's probably onto something. I read over this article, and this is actually the reason why I'm showing it is because he is talking about 4 different ways, and I think that they're right. So the first way is to teach people, and basically saying, look, dude, at the core, discipleship is teaching, and he's 100% right about that. Number 2 is to correct, and correcting is a word that's probably not the best to use, but for this conversation, it's okay. We'll use the word correct really just means to adjust. A lot of people get scared of the word correct, but correction is really just adjusting. It's like being on a ship, and you're the guy who's steering the ship. You're in control of the rudder, and you kind of go off the map a little bit. Maybe you misread the compass or something, or maybe you misread the GPS. And so now basically what ends up happening is you need somebody to help you. And so they come in and say, no, you've gone off the course a little bit. Here's how you get back on. And so you steer the boat back onto the proper course. So it's adjustment. That's what correction is. And so we all have problems in our Christianity. We all have problems in our walks with God. And so we need people to correct, AKA adjust. We need adjustments. We all need adjustments, whether it's attitude adjustment or moral adjustment, whatever it is, we all need adjustment. Number 3 is model. And he says, it's worth noticing Jesus didn't just command his disciples to teach people. He told them to teach people to obey. The goal of discipleship is to see lives transformed. And I think that he's absolutely right about that. Number 4 is love. To add a final angle, discipling is a form of mutual love. Yes, there's something of a teacher-student relationship. But I think he's right about this when he talks about a student to teacher relationship, because again, to go back to correction or adjusting, you got to think of yourself being on a ship and you lost your compass or your map burned or whatever. And the captain's sleeping or something. And he wakes up and says, what are you doing? And you go, what do you mean? And he says, well, we're supposed to be over there and you've gone off the course. And so, he yells and screams at you, and then you figure out how you're going to get back on course. And so you redirect the ship. That's what correction is. And if you don't correct, then you will shipwreck your faith. That's actually a biblical term. You can go find it if you want to, but you'll end up shipwrecking your faith. That's why I picked the example of the boats, being out on a ship. So what you have to understand is that in Christianity, correction's good, adjustment's good, and it comes with proper teaching. And this is why you need really good teachers. So to go back to one of the points that I made in this video, you cannot make disciples unless you yourself are a disciple, because a part of being a disciple is being a teacher. You have to teach other people. So he says, teach these people, these future disciples, to obey everything that I have commanded you. So there's an element of teaching in discipleship. And a lot of the teaching is practical teaching. So basically you sit down and you teach people, like I'm doing right now, you could say. I'm basically sitting down and teaching you basic stuff. That's what we do on this YouTube channel. I teach you a lot of basic stuff about the Bible and about Christianity and about God and so on and so forth, stuff that you probably are not getting in church. And so, that's another reason to subscribe if you have not subscribed already, because this is a really cool channel. And we would talk about everything from A to Z, eschatology, the end times, Christology, all kinds of amazing stuff. So we have a lot of fun here. But anyways, the point is that we get real deep into this stuff because my goal is to teach people. Because it's about discipleship. My goal really in life is to get people to become better Christians. Because a lot of people think, well, I said a prayer, I went to church, I said a prayer, I raised my hands, and now I'm good, I'm going to heaven. And it says, I like to tell people, hey, listen, that's not where the truck ends. That's not where it all stops. That's the starting point. That's not the ending point. Now that you have done that, now you're a Christian. Now you got to continue living the Christian life. And the way we live the Christian life is a little bit different than the other lives that we would live in. We need people, other Christians, to come in and help us live a better Christian life. My name's Adam Jordan Clark. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment below and tell me something interesting or maybe a really cool story. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification, because I publish a brand new video every single day. My name's Adam Jordan Clark. Thanks for watching. And as always, I will see you in the next video.